October 19th, 2005, item number 98. Today's guest is Chris from Digital Photography Tips from the Top Floor.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. Before we get into the interview with Chris, a couple quick news and notes. First, today's show is show number 98. I did skip a show for Monday, and what I'm going to be doing is also skipping this coming Saturday and Monday. So show number 99 will be on Wednesday, October 26th, and that sets up show number 100 to be on October 29th. For show 99, just to let you know, it'll be an interview with Heather Green from Business Week. For show 100, I've got a couple ideas what I'd like to do for the 100 show. One is an idea from John Wall from the M Show, and his idea is to turn the tables where I am the guest and John would interview me. So basically my same questions, John would be doing the interviewing. The other idea is for me to interview a podcast listener. So just someone who listens, we'd be able to get a perspective of what someone who's not interested in doing podcasting, but is very interested in listening to podcasts, what they think. And then finally, I would also leave it up to some random idea that you may throw to me between now and October 26th. So between now and October 26th, send me an email. Let me know what you'd like to see for the 100th show. And send that email to rob@podcast411.com. I'm going to leave the 100th show up to you, the listeners. And talking of listeners, I have a podcast rant from Mark in South Bend, Indiana. And we're going to go ahead and play this, and I'll comment about it on the outside of it. Here we go.
Hi, this is Podcast 411. Please leave a message after the beep.
Darn an answer machine. Oh, well, hey, Rob, this is Mark. I've only been listening to podcasts for a couple weeks, and I was wondering if you could do a show on ID tags and file name formats. It'd be so helpful if the podcasters out there would just kind of standardize their file name and ID tags, if they even use them, and if not, if they could use them, and go back and update their old files that they're still putting out there so that they're standardized. A lot of times I go in and download a new podcast, and I'll download everything, and when their stuff's not standardized, it puts it all over my MP3 player, and sometimes I can't find the stuff. And hey, I love your show, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Mark, thanks for the feedback, and I can definitely sympathize with you. I hate it when people do not put ID3 tags on their podcasts, yes, or correct ones, yes. People sometimes will just put yes as their main title and show number, so every one of their shows, yes, shows up the same. So please, if you're out there, yes, go to our ID3 tag tutorial. Let's go to podcast411.com, click on tutorials, and go to the ID3 tag tutorial to learn how to put in some proper ID3 tags. Put in the good namespaces. Help your listeners find the correct shows. Yes. Well, thanks again, Mark, for that feedback. Well, we're going to go ahead now and get into the interview with Chris from Digital Photography Tips from the Top Floor. As the title suggests, this is a podcast about photography and digital photography tips. Without any further ado, here we go. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, how's it going?
Good. I will start you with the first question, and that is, what was your first computer?
That was a Commodore C64, and I got that when I was, I think I had to pay half of that myself, and I got the other half by my parents for Christmas. I must have been around 14 to 15 back then.
Before we get into your first podcast, I'll ask you this question. What was your first camera?
The first real camera that I had, and with real I mean an SLR, was a Minolta X700. I really loved it. It was a really good camera, very solidly built, and I didn't know, when I bought it, it was a choice that I'm not sure I made a real conscious choice back then. I was just too young for that. I just knew it was good, I could afford it, and then it turned out to be one of those items that really sell for a long time, that you can get repaired for tens of years, and I think it was still in production and sold until just a couple of years ago. So I kind of intuitively made the right choice there.
We'll move into the podcasting realm here. And what was the first podcast you listened to?
Oh, that's a very good question. The first podcast I listened to, I think, was Adam Curry's Daily Source Code. My brother introduced me to the podcasting thing. He sent me a link and said, hey, you got to check that one out. And I listened to that.
Which ones are you listening to now on a regular basis?
Oh, that's a very long list. I'm trying to stay up to date, and I listen, at home in the car, and while I do other things, I have some of them running in the background. And let me just try to go through a list and not really forget anyone here. Adam Curry, of course, the Area 51 show, splatter comedy, not for the faint of heart, but really good. A couple of science things, Berkeley Rocks, for example. I do listen to the Catholic Insider, Creative Cow, Digital Flotsam, Tim Henson's Distorted View. Again, wouldn't recommend this to everyone, but it's definitely earned its explicit rating in iTunes. Keith and the Girl, The Pot Princess, Media Artist Secrets, Franklin McMahon. And then what else do I listen to? Dave Weiner's Morning Coffee Notes, Podcast 411, of course, Scott Fletcher's Podcheck Review. Scott is a cool guy. He's really cool to work with.
Yeah, he does voiceover for you.
He does. That was, I think, after the 5th or 6th show that I did, I found that I needed someone who really knew what he did when he was doing voiceover. So I went out and signed up on radiodaddy.com. That's a forum where you can ask for free voiceovers. And I got someone to do a voiceover for me, but it wasn't what I wanted. And then I found out that Scott Fletcher, that you can hire him, get him to do voiceovers for you. So that's what I then did, and I've been using those voiceovers ever since. And that's really cool. What else? Quirks and Quarks from CBC Radio, another kind of a techie thing. There's a German one that is very interesting. It's sushiradio.com. And then I listen to the PK&J show. Highly recommended if you like music is the Tartan Podcast, independent Scottish music. And then just to finish up the list, WNYC's Leonard Lopez show. I really like that. And sometimes I listen to Yeast Radio, which is, again, marked explicit in iTunes, so be careful.
Yeah, Madge is definitely explicit. About the only one more explicit than Madge is Tim Henson, and Tim is
probably Tim is about 11 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yes, and a very, very funny podcast. And Tim, congratulations for getting the money to go to the Podcast Expo, and look forward to seeing you at the show.
Yeah, Tim, congratulations from my side as well.
Okay. You have quite a list of podcasts. So you are not just podcasting, you are living podcasting.
Well, podcasting is the coolest thing since sliced bread for me. I mean, just the fact that you can take them on the road, you can take them with you, you can listen to them when and where you want it. It's just perfect. It's the medium for me. I always wanted to get into some sort of a broadcasting, local radio thing. I always wanted to do that. But then the one thing that kept me from doing it is that the fact that, you don't really have an audience there. You have a few people that listen, but they have to be there at the time, and that just limits the possibilities, and it limits them quite a lot. And podcasting feels much more free to me, and I can do it from home. I can do it wherever I want as long as I have my recording gear and an internet connection.
Let's talk a little bit about your podcast. There was a reason for the second question about what was your first camera, and do you want to explain to people what Tips from the Top Floor is about?
Tips from the Top Floor, that was the original name. I later renamed it to Digital Photography Tips from the Top Floor. That was shortly after iTunes started incorporating podcasts with their 4.9 version. Just to make it a bit more clear from the title what it actually is. The podcast is about digital photography, as the title says, but there's many non-digital photographers listening to that show as well. So I think it's more about photography in general. It's photography lessons, it's tips and tricks. I do interviews with professional photographers, various areas of photography. I had an extreme sports photographer, I had a press photographer, I had a panoramic photographer. I will have a few more famous photographers in the future, actually. I've just finished recording an interview with a German photographer, Gabo, who was on the covers of the Vogue, the Rolling Stone, and lots of other magazines, and works with all the stars. I do sound seeing tours. Basically, tell people what I do while I take pictures. I did a sound seeing tour on on landscape photography that while recording turned into a cow photography podcast, just because I was doing that in the Black Forest and it was next to an enclosure with cows, and they were very curious, and they came up, and so I just changed that thing into taking pictures of animals, of cows, and in the end I almost got electrocuted by running into the electric fence, and that's all recorded there. I did a bit of cutting on that just to tighten it up a bit, but basically the whole thing is, and I think it was my show number 40 or something, and then later on my girlfriend helped me find a great title for it, and I called it Moving Landscapes, and it turned out to be an all-time favorite. People love it, and I think it's a good example for what sound seeing is. It's really being there at the time when things happen, and people still learn something from it. So that's what Tips from the Top Floor is about. One of the things that I did after a while, when iTunes came out, and I got so many more listeners, and I got so much more feedback and things. At a point in time, I had to handle some 20, 25 listener emails per day, and then I decided to put up a forum where I could let the listeners kind of take care of each other, and that really helped me get a bit more room to breathe and a bit more time to doing more podcasts this way. Now, one of the things I now used the forum for is that I put what I call the top secret area on the forum. That's only visible to registered users, so it's a nice way to also drive people to register on the forum and kind of build a community. The fun thing is now, those kind of things, like, okay, I don't have a trip to the dentist recorded, but I just recently I tested out a new piece of gear, and I recorded an Autobahn cast. I recorded while driving on the Autobahn, and I'm telling people a bit about the Autobahn. It's not photography related at all, but that's something that I then post in the top secret area just to kind of reward people who are on the forum, who are active, to treat them to something that is a bit outside what I usually do, and the listeners seem to really appreciate that.
Now, I noticed you mentioning on a few of your shows about the forum board. One of the persons that put their 7,000th post up there got a beanbag, but you didn't start your forum board until about your 47th, 48th show, or somewhere around that range. So you went from no posts to 7,000 posts really quickly.
That's right, and I'm very surprised about that. I mean, I knew about the number of listeners. I know how many downloads I have on most of the shows. I do know where I'm placed on the Feedburner rankings, and that's all nice. And so I knew there was potential for this forum to really take off. And of course, the podcast is the perfect medium to advertise that as well. So I did a bit of both. I started the forum. I started to point people towards it. I started to answer questions in emails by asking people to please post that question on the forum, because they had a better chance to get an answer, and the answer there would then also be of value to other people that came to the forum. And that whole thing started to explode, basically, and I'm totally flabbergasted by that. And
can you tell our listeners where to locate your podcast and website?
The website is at tipsfromthetopfloor.com, and from there, there's also links to the forum and to an online gallery. A gallery, by the way, I forgot to mention that another part of the podcast or the show is assignments. I give out assignments, and most people really love them. They go out, they shoot pictures, they submit them to the assignments, and then later on they can see how other photographers interpreted the same topic as opposed to their own interpretation. That is all on tipsfromthetopfloor.com. I guess the easiest way to subscribe to the podcast is to use either iTunes or Yahoo Podcasts. I've taken a quick look there. I have to check that out a bit more. It looks pretty cool. So that would be some of the easiest ways to get to the podcast. You can also download the MP3s directly from tipsfromthetopfloor.com, directly from the website.
Let's talk about how you put together your show. What are you using hardware and software-wise to record and edit your podcast?
Sound-wise, I'm in the lucky position to be a sound professional and to have quite a good collection of microphones here. Having that said, the first bunch of shows I recorded with a cheap headset and did some heavy post-processing on that sound just to make it sound somewhat bearable to my ears. And then later on I switched to an Electro Voice RE20 microphone. It's not cheap, no, definitely not. It's the standard radio DJ microphone in the US at least. Here in Europe, sound professionals use that for other purposes. purposes, not for voice recording usually. But yeah, I like the sound of it. It's nice. It doesn't suffer from pop sounds and things like that, or it doesn't really suffer that badly. I run that into a Mackie mixer, and that then goes. And now comes the funny part. I do have all the professional sound cards, gears, outboard, 16 channel, 24 channel recording stuff here, but I don't use that for a podcast. As long as you get the original signal good enough, you can run that into the line-in of your regular sound card. I'm using my onboard sound card in the computer, and I run the output of the Mackie mixer into the line-in of my sound card. And as recording software, I use Wavelab, and I also use that for editing, at least for the podcast, that is. I mean, if I record a band, do a 16-channel recording, I use different software, but for the podcast, Wavelab works just fine for me.
You have one of the more popular podcasts on the web. At least according to FeedBurner, you're in the top 5 with over 5,000 subscribers. How did you go about promoting your show outside of podcasting to get such a strong listener base? What
I did, and I did that very early, I think after the third or fourth show, I found that I'd need to find a way to get the word out about this podcast. And I just recorded a bunch of short promos for other shows, for some of the shows that I listened to, and I looked which shows were popular, and I just sent them short, specifically for them made promos, including their show name and telling them who I was and something that they could play on their show. And some of them did, and that got me some listeners, and did at least 10 different podcast directories that I submitted the show to in order to, just have it out there. That was about all I did. And then when iTunes came along and I changed the name to the show from Tips from the Top Floor to Digital Photography Tips on the Top Floor, that's when it then really started to take off, because people put in the search term photography or digital photography, and my show pops up at one of the first ones there.
Are you doing anything right now to try to generate revenue for your show?
It's hard. Not that easy. I do have a daytime job that I live off, and that's a good thing. Living off podcasting, if you're not Adam Curry, I guess it's not that easy. I have put Google ads on my website and into the forum and onto the gallery. So basically, there's a bit of revenue from that. And other than that, there's no revenue at all right now. There is an online store on the site where people can buy a mug or a baseball cap or fridge magnets with the logo on. But I don't even run that. That's a friend of mine who designed the logo and who's an artist in Argentina who can use the money. So I told him, you go ahead and do that job, and I'll do a bit of advertising for it. And I think he has made $35 on the mug so far. So it's not really making a lot of money. And I don't sell Senseo machines as well. So I have the dream that many podcasters have, that I'll be discovered by someone someday who will ask me to either do a podcast for them or hire me for something else. But that probably won't happen unless I get active. So I've planned to do a bit of a marketing campaign, and I'll be sending out advertising packages to photography magazines in the US, and maybe I'll get someone to advertise. Just today, I received 1,000 business cards for Tips from the Top Floor. I just had them made, and they came out really beautiful.
Yeah, business cards are a really good way to help promote your show. Everybody who has a podcast should have a business card, so when they start talking to people and they get the deer in the headlight look, they can hand them a business card, so later on when it clicks, the person has the card in their hand or in their pocket or in their purse or wherever.
I am happy and really, really lucky to have some very dedicated listeners that actually are going to help me with getting those things mailed out in the US to the according people. And I'm just regularly blown away by the support I'm receiving from the listeners. And some of them have asked me to please put a donate button up on my website so they could give me something back for what I'm doing with the podcast. But I don't want to do that. I'm not the tip jar kind of person. So,
what advice do you have for those that are looking to do a podcast? And I should preface that. Let me preface that. Other than doing something that is your passion, because I've already got that.
You read my mind. That was the first thing I was about to say. No, the things, the advice I would have to new podcasters is to not be afraid to do it. Just go out and do it. I mean, there's so many people just thinking about doing it that will never really get into it. Never mind your first 5 shows, they will be bad. But when I listen back to my first 5 to 10 shows, they sent shivers down my spine. Negative ones. Talk to other podcasters. Team up with another podcaster. The best thing that I've done throughout that whole podcasting time was to get together with other podcasters, send them mails, ask them about things, get their opinion on if I should do something or not, then do my own thing still, but at least have gotten some sort of an opinion and a second thought on things, and that has really helped me. And then get your podcast into the directories, try to make it popular and stick with it. And I think a regular schedule will also be quite helpful.
Well, thank you very much for the advice.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
Well, Chris, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Well, folks, that concludes our interview with Chris from Digital Photography, Tips from the Top Floor. I highly recommend you check out his podcast at tipsfromthetopfloor.com. Chris, thanks again so much for coming on the show. I appreciate talking with you and look forward to talking to you again. At the end of today's show, we're going to go ahead and play a promo from the RETC podcast that comes out of Fordham University, so please stick around for that. As I mentioned earlier, I'm looking for your feedback on what I should do for show number 100. If you don't want to send an email, you can always leave a voicemail at 206-666-HELP. That's 206-666-4357. That's going to do it for us today. As always, I'm your host, Rob, from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different.
Live from the Bronx, Fordham University's RETC Tech Pod provides lively conversations about technology with leading educators. This is a podcast for teachers and learners of all ages. EdTech experts and authors Mark Gura and RETC Director Dr. Kathy King bring EdTech updates, curriculum ideas, interviews, views, and research you can use on technology and education. From software applications to personal conversations with educators and EdTechies, this is not your typical podcast. The RETC Tech Pod is developed and published by Fordham's Regional Educational Technology Center. Visit us at www.retcfordham.edu/RETC Tech Pod, live from the Bronx.